It was certainly an unexpected surprise that Atlus released Persona 3 Portable on current-gen consoles, and it wasn't FES. Nonetheless, I was excited to try it all over again. In this video, we will examine the story, and I'll provide my opinions along the way. Then, I'll discuss my overall opinion on the themes of Persona 3 itself, followed by my thoughts on the Seize team, and a quick gameplay discussion with closing comments on how Atlus did in this mostly untouched port. I've been waiting for this. Our story opens with Makoto arriving at the train station as the camera pans to Yukari holding a pistol and contemplating suicide before deciding against it. As the train arrives at Iwatodai, the clock strikes midnight and the mood changes ominously. Everything goes dark and silent, and Makoto's unsure what is happening. Shaken, he hurries back to the dorm as we see coffins lining a deserted street and a full moon in the sky. As we make it to the dorm, a strange young boy in a prison outfit greets us, which is certainly not what you'd expect under these circumstances, right? After you sign the contract with the creepy kid, you're greeted by Yukari and Mitsuru, who is surprised you arrived so late. After you rest up, Yukari takes you onto the monorail to Port Island Station, and from there to Gakukan High School. Yukari advises us it's not wise to mention anything you've seen to anyone either. It seems like a reasonable ask to me though. After you meet your teacher, she alludes to the hardship you've already had to endure before you transferred to Gakukan, that being the death of your parents. This is already a lot to deal with just off the start of the game, and you're handling it pretty well. After the principal goes through the opening ceremony, we are greeted by the total bro, Junpei, who lets you know he's a pretty nice dude by the way. He seems to think you and Yukari are dating, which is also completely shut down by her. Yukari mentions not to talk about last night, which Junpei immediately interprets as something sexual. Back at the dorms, we meet Akihiko and Mitsuru, who mentions that there have been cases of apathy syndrome in the city. Akihiko feels that this has to be them, otherwise he's not going to deal with it. Passing by some students, they also mention that there's been weird occurrences happening in the school, but aren't really quite sure what to make of it. Once you made it back to the dorms, you're greeted by the chairman of the board of the school, Shuji Ikutsuki. His purpose at this point is to welcome you here, and doesn't make too much of a fuss about what you saw when you arrived. Oh well, nothing to see here I guess. While we sleep, we find that we are being spied on by Mitsuru and Ikutsuki, and both of them aren't really sure about you yet, given the strange circumstances of your arrival, and we are then led to Port Island Station, where the dark hour turns, and an innocent man seemingly dies a horrible death. We also learn that the dark hour is a hidden hour that starts at midnight, and a regular person becomes transmorgified into a coffin, and as such, is oblivious to everything that happens within this time frame. Since you are still sleeping and unaffected by it, it is believed that you have the potential. The potential can best be described as someone who has the ability to summon a persona and fight shadows in the dark hour, to put it simply. As another dark hour passes, it is said that we do not exhibit any of the symptoms others who have the potential do, making us a special case. The dorm is then attacked directly by a shadow, and as Yukari is attacked, the evoker falls to Makoto as he summons his persona Orpheus, who then transforms into Thanatos and rips apart the shadow. Now I have to say, as cool as this was in vanilla Persona and FES, this particular scene didn't quite hit the same for me in Portable, but it was still really a cool moment. Makoto, understandably exhausted, faints from exerting such immense power, and awakens in the Velvet Room where Igor advises that we have awakened our persona, and as such, developing social links help create stronger personas. This is nothing new to a veteran Persona player, but provides a nice insight to newer players who may be experiencing their first Persona game. We awaken in the hospital with Yukari, who candidly tells us she already knew everything about us before we arrived, and she's just like us, as our parents died, and so did her father in an accident when she was younger. There was an explosion, and no one seems to really know what happened. Since she has no relationship with her mother, she's also alone too. She knows he was working in the lab for the Kirijo group, and working with Mitsuru, she hopes to find out the real cause. Now once we've recovered and back at the dorms, we are briefed by Ikutsuki about the nature of the Dark Hour and the purpose of the Seize team. The group is known as a club at school, but their real purpose is to defeat shadows during the Dark Hour. Shadows have been the cause of most of the horrible news that has come to pass. We also learned that a shadow can only be defeated by a persona user, which is us. Pretty cool, right? As we attempt to doze off for the night, the strange boy appears in our room saying the end of everything will come, and he knows that we have awakened to our persona, but he doesn't know where we will end up. In most ominous fashion, he tells us he's always watching and disappears, leaving us questioning what's exactly going to happen. After another day at Gakukan, Mitsuru advises us to come to the dorms after class for an important announcement. Junpei Lori has a potential and has now joined the Seize team and will be moving in with us. With that now out of the way, Ikutsuki said in the early days only Mitsuru and Akihiko could summon personas, but eventually the team grew to 5. The Seize team gets their first mission to Tartarus, which, to most of everyone's surprise, is right where the school is. As the clock strikes midnight, the atmosphere changes, and we finally see how ominous Tartarus really is. as a bell tolls, sending a shiver down your spine. At this point, no one really knows why it forms in place at the school, and no one really has taken the time to explore it either. With Makoto and Junpei on board, it seemed a good time as any to check it out. This is our first real mission together, and to get put to task with defeating all the shadows on the floor. This section also serves as the game's combat tutorial as well. After the shadows have been defeated, and we're back at school, Mitsuru has won the student council president election, and we find out that the Kirito group owns the school too. Coincidence? I think not, but more on that later. Afterwards, we get to go to the police station where you get to buy new weapons, armor, and accessories for your battles against the shadows from Officer Kurosawa, who takes a by any means necessary approach to fighting crime and conflicts in the city. While at the school assembly, the principal mentions that strange incidents have been occurring on the news, and he doesn't believe any of the students are involved, and wants the class to take responsibility for themselves, which, as this applies to the C's team, they take this quite literally as to what happens later with regards to the shadows. During this time, you are also asked to start joining clubs, like the Kendo Club and Student Council, which is what I chose, as well as the Home Economics class. These groups are beneficial to join. As you level the Arcana, you can fuse stronger personas, which you almost certainly need to do for the endgame. We then get to visit Akihiko in the hospital, and are greeted by an edgy guy with a beanie. As he leaves, it's brought up that the cases of apathy syndrome are increasing, and the edgy guy knows about it, so we wanted to ask him some questions. Junpei also brings him boxing gloves, and we learn that Akihiko once felt powerless in his life, and the gloves allow him to train himself and learn to fight, to never feel that way again. This is something I really like about Akihiko too, since he doesn't allow himself to fail, and wants to be the best version of himself that he possibly can be. As he does off for the night, our creepy kid arrives in our room to warn of an ordeal to which we have yet to face during a full moon. Every full moon now, we will have to face a challenge that will test us, but what does he exactly mean by this if we fail? Well, we're going to find out. As Akihiko and Mitsuru are talking about your potential, a shadow appears that is under unusual circumstances. The shadow has actually appeared outside Tartarus, and has to be dealt with or the city will be destroyed. Making our way to the monorail to face our first shadow boss, we see the railcar lined with transmogrified people. Before we fight the boss, however, we have to face a small gauntlet of lesser shadows, which are really easy provided you did a minimal amount of grinding in Tartarus earlier. With the little guys now out of the way, we now face our first ordeal shadow boss of the Priestess Arcana, and you're being timed to defeat them, or the railcar will crash and everyone dies. No pressure at all for your first mission, huh? The fight itself is not super hard, but it does teach you to use your debuffs and to attack the summons, as to avoid the boss healing, and thus reducing your time to escape from the railcar. All this will really take is proper leveling and some patience, and you'll handle it with no problems. After you stop the train, Yukari asks how you knew which breaks were the correct ones, allowing for a cheeky response. As a reward, you also unlock the double team attack, which allows for an instant critical, which is keyed for later in the game. In the command room, Akutsuki is pleased with the team's progress, and is relieved that there won't be any bad headlines to read in the news. And so it seems Creepy Boy's premonitions are right, but what does it all mean? It surely can't be anything good. After we've cleared the boss and given our next foreboding message from the creepy kid, Akihiko has recovered and is ready to help us fight shadows, which is a relief since he's totally awesome. We also learn about the next Persona user that will be joining us in Fuku Yamagishi. We found out that she was also in the hospital at the same time as Akihiko, and that's how they found out about her. Junpei, of course, takes this opportunity to make it sexual and wants to give her some private lessons. Very on the nose for him at this point in the story. In the interim, I would definitely advise you taking some time to explore more of Tartarus and fusing better personas, because what comes next is an even bigger test. The C's team begins to investigate more into Fuka, and while at the dorm, Junpei mentions there was a girl who was found at the front gate of the school, and there was a rumor spreading that there was an angry spirit from a ghost story. Beginning his story, Junpei tells the team that if you get caught at the school late at night, he'll be devoured by a ghost that roams the halls at night. He also claims that his friend saw Fuka go into the school on the night of the accident. Akihiko feels this situation is also worth investigating. While you retire back to your room, the strange boy appears to tell us of another ordeal that will happen in another week. But just how many of these ordeals are there, and why does this boy keep finding us? We can't really worry about that now, as it's imperative that we find out more about Fuka before it's too late. We ask her in the school to hear about more encounters and rumors from the students. The C's team gathers at the dorms to discuss what we learned. We learned that there are 3 victims, and all 3 had to be hospitalized. Also, these 3 victims hung out together and got into a bad crowd, which frequented behind Port Island Station, and thus forcing the C's team to investigate, which is known to have a bad reputation around town as a not-so-safe area. Meanwhile, in the back alley, a group of kids are hanging out, and as the C's team begins to get into an altercation, the edgy dude with the beanie from the hospital shows up to break up the scuffle. The edgy dude then headbutts one of the punks, putting them in their place. We also find out his name, Shinjiro, and he's also from Gakukan. He almost immediately knows we want to ask the ghost story, and says it's only a rumor, and also the girls were just messing around with Fuka and came to Port Island Station frequently. Shinjiro thinks Fuka might be dead, and hasn't been home in over a week. which, to think, if you're her parents, never asking any questions to the school or anything is simply just bizarre. But anyway, we now had to question Mystery Kota, her homeroom teacher, if he knows anything. Shinjiro knows Akihiko put us up to it, but he doesn't really want to get involved any further for now. Mitsuru is already in the facility office, getting ready to question Mystery Kota when Yukari and Makoto both enter and proceed to question him about the missing student Fuka Yamagishi. Natsuki then interrupts and confides that she is one of the girls who bullied Fuka and locked her inside the gym, as she never came back, so it was assumed that she committed suicide. Then she appeared at the gate the next morning. They kept looking for Fuka, but then each person went missing, and ended up like Maki. Yukota then acts like he's looking out for the students by not reporting it to the police. Yeah, sure man, just do whatever's best for the class, right, asshole? Natsuki then mentions that they all heard a voice right before each of them went missing, and calling out to each of their names. At this point, we are now certain it is them, and they are now attacking and targeting humans. Natsuki is to stay at the dorm so that they can keep an eye on her and make sure that she's safe, while Seize goes and looks out for Fuka. The team then goes into the school at night, specifically during the dark hour, to look for her in Tartarus. Once Makoto and Yukari get the key from the facility office and meet up in the lobby, the dark hour strikes and the team goes looking for Fuka. Meanwhile, in the dorms, Natsuki begins to hear the voice and is drawn into Tartarus. While Mitsuru and Yukari wait at the base of Tartarus, Makoto is knocked out and woken up to the creepy child, who says he will once again have one ordeal to face tonight. Oh, awesome! A 2-for-1 special, lucky me. He also says we are going to need Fuka for what is ahead. Again, this dude is always so cryptic in his messaging. Lucky for us, Junpei and Akiko were on the case and found Fuka rather quickly, and she mentioned she's able to see where the shadows are, and as a result, was able to avoid them. On the way out of Tartarus, Junpei notices that it's a full moon, and Makoto and Akihiko make the connection that the monorail incident and the dorm attack were also both full moons. And so, we enter our next ordeal with the dual shadow boss of the Emperor and Empress Arcana. Fuka, under duress from the shadows, awakens to her persona, Lucia, and can then help us identify boss's weaknesses, which change when they do a paradigm shift. Let me say that this fight is not hard, but it can be a little annoying with the boss's constantly shifting weaknesses and waiting on Fuka to tell you what it is. It still ends pretty quickly provided you play smart. After the battle, Natsuki is shocked where she is, but happy Fuka is alive and okay. Given Natsuki is not a persona user, she won't be able to remember any of this or Fuka saving her life. Kind of shitty, isn't it? After Fuka has recovered, everyone meets in the command room with Akutsuki, who already knows who she is, much to her surprise. Fuka still blames herself for the events that have transpired, but Yukari assures her that she is the victim, and Mitsuru says that she is special since she has the power to see shadows through her persona. Fuka, with no hesitation, immediately wants to join the Seas and says that she would be there rather than at home. A minor gripe I have with this is why didn't she elaborate more on what her home life was and why it was so terrible and why she was so quick to join Seas, but it just would have helped build her character just a little bit more at this point. We also now firmly grasp that the shadows are tied to the moon's phases, but what more is to come? The next day, Fuka rejoins Class 2E and is made fun of by her classmates for being the weird ghost girl. Natsuki, looking to make amends, comes to her aid and wants to be her friend, to support her and right the wrongs from the past. Our creepy friend comes back into our room during the dark hour to congratulate us on our victory. While he still feels the end of the world is inevitable, our potential has him second-guessing somewhat. After you agree to be his friend, we finally learn his name. It's Pharos. Which, another fun fact about the name, is that Pharos is based on a famous lighthouse in ancient Egyptian times, around 280 BCE, otherwise known as the Pharos of Alexandria. Pretty cool little detail, huh? With that information, if he's named himself after a lighthouse or a beacon, what exactly is he a beacon for? Surely nothing good. We also know that he's of the Death Arcana, and is a social link that is auto-leveled as we progress through the story. At this point, while we wait for another full moon, you really need to continue grinding and choosing better personas, and level up your team because what comes next is really no easy task, and you're going to want to be fully prepared as well as working on any social links from the clubs or friends you have made thus far. While at school, we learn the chairman wants us to pay a visit. We are also introduced at this time to Best Pup Koro-chan, who is playing with Yukari and Fuka. Sadly, we find out that his owner was a priest and passed away, so Koro-chan takes himself on a walk on the same route that he and his owner did. Koro, like a good boy, sits still at the site where his owner died from a car accident, awaiting his return that will never come. While in the command room, Yakutsuki tells us that shadows can be divided into 12 categories according to their characteristics. We also learn that there are 8 shadows we haven't seen yet and will need to take out. We don't know their motives yet, and they don't kill their prey but feed on their minds. When Yukari asks why Tartarus exists, Mitsuru grows apprehensive but seems to be hiding something from the group. During the dark hour that evening, at Port Island Station, the punk from earlier in the story was awoken from being transmorgified, where we have our first sighting of Rock and Roll Jesus, Glasses Man, and Anime Waifu Girl. We find out that someone basically put a hit out on the punk, and so Rock and Roll Jesus shoots him per his client's wishes. As the punk is left wounded, the three leave the scene, and we find out about the revenge website that exists, presumably where these three get their requests. That evening, at the local ramen spot, Shinji is met by Akihiko and he tries to convince Shinji to join the C's team, but ultimately can't convince him yet. The next day in the command room, Yukari asks Fuka if she knows anything about several students missing from about 10 years ago. These students were reported missing, but something seems off. Yukari feels Mitsuru knows something about this, but also isn't sure if it's the work of the shadows either. Fuka pledges to look into this and help her out. That evening, we are visited by Pharos, who warns of another full moon in a week and to be prepared for this. But what challenges lie ahead for us on this full moon? With the group together once again, Fuka scans with Lucia to determine the next shadow, who is located at the Shirakawa Boulevard. Junpei takes the opportunity to make a joke about the area having those type of hotels. After you've assembled your team, you end up in what is, in my opinion, the first unique dungeon in this game so far. First, you head straight up to the 3rd floor to fight the Hierophant Shadow, and what is different about this boss is that they inflict status ailments on you and also debuffs. They really are not hard, but you will need to have some items stored that remove ailments. After you've defeated it, you get locked into the room with yet another shadow, but you have no idea where it's at. As you look into the mirror, you are transported into a hotel room with a shower running in another room, presumably where Yukari is. A shadow's voice in your head attempts to get you to submit, but you have to answer a series of questions right. Once you shake the mind trap from the shadow, you and Yukari both escape and meet up with the rest of the team, and you have to do a small minigame where you'll be picking 3 mirrors in the hotel room with no reflection and then breaking them. Once this is done, and you head back into the suite room to fight another shadow, this time it's a shadow of the Lover's Arcana, which is pretty fitting, right? You're in a love hotel, so that makes perfect sense to really use this Arcana here. The shadow uses charms, so get ready to use those items, but this is a short fight that I really had no problems with. After the fight is done, Fuka mentions that she has found out some information for Yukari, and will be told later, and Junpei stays jealous of your exploits. As everyone leaves, Rock and Roll Jesus and his merry band were watching everything the whole time and are impressed by you. They don't view you as a threat just yet, but will be asking Shinji the next opportunity they get. Shinji also shares the same fate as them, but what exactly does that mean? After a few days of rest, we are gathered in the command room where Ukutsuki has some information to tell us, but not before Yukari butts in to ask Mitsuru about the missing students from 10 years ago. Yukari knows that the students that were missing all collapsed and had to be hospitalized like the girls that bullied Fuka, so Mitsuru finally comes clean about what happened and says that her family had been doing research into the shadows to try and learn their abilities. The man who leads the project was Mitsuru's grandfather. He assembles a team of scientists and collects shadows. 10 years ago, they lost control of these shadows, which led to an explosion, and the shadows escaped and altered the world, creating Tartarus and the Dark Hour. And so, we find out these shadows that we've been fighting on the full moons are the ones that got away. Tartarus is in the place of the school, and this is where they were conducting the experiments. Pretty fucked, isn't it? Understandably disgusted, Yukari calls Mitsuru a liar, but Mitsuru says it was the only way and never wanted to deceive them. Persona users are also the only ones that can fight these shadows. Ikutsuki interjects and says it's no one's fault, and the team will need to defeat the remaining shadows that are the cause of all this. With 6 remaining, our journey continues. The next day, Akihiko meets Shinji in Port Island Station, where he goes to check up on his well-being, like a total bro would do. We also learn that they both were orphans, and Shinji calls him out for being overly sappy and not his usual demeanor. Akihiko tells him he knows how to end the Dark Hour. Shinji is impressed, but at this point isn't going to do anything to help us. Back at the dorms, Mitsuru asks Fuka to find out as much as she can about the incident from 10 years ago. Giving her permission to use the Kirijo Group databases, Mitsuru also takes this opportunity to be thankful for Fuka being awesome, and to be fair, she is, and also an exceptional navigator. Next, we see Junpei outside the theater being bummed that Tartarus and the Dark Hour will eventually go away. You can feel for Junpei here, as he wasn't anyone of notoriety before joining C's, and it gave him a purpose and determination he didn't have before. Yukari even has a self-reflection moment in the dorms and feels stupid for believing in things like friendship and trust. Her dad's letter is read off, detailing his involvement with the Kirijo Group and his love for her mom and herself. She is now more emboldened than ever to complete the mission for C's. That evening, we meet with Pharos, who brings up the death of our parents from 10 years ago. He's able to know this because our persona treats us as a mirror, and Pharos says he will always be here for us because we're friends. How nice of him. After we finish our exams, we head to Yakushima to visit Mitsuru's father. Before the trip, we see Fuka's personal growth as well as meeting a new member of our team, Ken. We learn that Ken's parents also died, so you and him have something in common through tragedy. We also know that he has the potential to summon a persona as well. Next stop, summer vacation. Finally, some rest and relaxation. The C's team is on a boat to Yakushima, but the atmosphere is still heavy from the ramifications of what Mitsuru said earlier to the team. Once we enter the mansion, we are greeted coldly by Mitsuru's father, who seems to lack proper social skills. Since we don't have long to stay, it's time to unwind at the beach. Junpei, Makoto, and Akihiko begin fawning over Fuka, Yukari, and Mitsuru, and the team gets to relax for a day before weird things start to happen. That evening, Mitsuru talks with her father, who preaches that she needs to have trust in others, especially since the Kyoryuger group split from the Nanjo group. He also knows that she accessed the family's database and uses a trip as a cover for it. This guy's clearly very smart, and he's seen some shit too. He then gathers everyone together to lay it all out for the C's team, and to hear everything. No bullshit. He admits the adults are the ones to blame, and there's no choice left but to rely on them. He also admits his father wanted to create a time manipulation device to stop unwanted events from happening, and to change the future however you like. As the research continued, his father changed and only had nihilism in his heart, and eventually caused his madness. It is very respectable of Takaharu to tell the C's team the truth, since he could have very easily held it and kept them all working for them, but he also realizes how bad the shadow problem has become and tells them all the truth. As old footage is played, Yukari recognizes the voice to be her father. This message advises that we must eliminate all the shadows. Her father, Ichiro Takeba, blames himself for the explosion and subsequent escape of the shadows. Takaharu, after the footage, blames himself for pushing him to continue his research, even knowing the risks. Shocked by all the revelations, Yukari ends up lashing out at Mitsuru and runs away, and you have to go calm her down. When you find Yukari on the beach, she tells you the story behind her family life, which she admits was not the best, having grown up with a not so great relationship with her mom, and she also admits to having some bitterness towards Mitsuru as well, since she seems to have it so much better. After we cheer her up, Junpei breaks up our sentimental moment to warn us about the dark hour and continue on to the next day. While in the forest, Akutsuki tells us about an anti-shadow weapon that's escaped. What exactly does that mean? We also have to stop something that is even more powerful than we currently are. Okay bro, no problem at all. But before that, we go on Operation Babe Hunt, which, depending on how you look at this section, is either a nice comedic break or super cringe. As they strike out time after time, they see someone that blows them all away. As Akihiko and Junpei both fumble again with this mysterious person, you get your chance and she throws herself onto you. Makoto has that Chad energy for real, doesn't he guys? As everyone converges to the tree where you find this mysterious person, Akutsuki is pleased to have finally found what was missing, and guess what? She's an android named Aigis. Thankfully, you get a little bit more detail into this, as she was the tank that Akutsuki was referring to. Aigis was created 10 years ago to fight the uncontrollable shadows. She even has her own persona. I was pretty hyped that she was on our side now, since whatever's on the horizon isn't ready for us. An interesting part of this dialogue too is that she knows you already, and Akutsuki seems to think that she's bugging. As our vacation continues, I thought this section provided a nice little break from all the heavy stuff we dealt with earlier, as the team just gets to have fun together and learn about Aigis. It's nice just to have some goofy moments to help build the characters up in a visual novel setting. Now that our vacation has ended, Shinji is seen hanging in the back alley of Port Island and runs into the trio of Rock and Roll Jesus, Anime Waifu, and Glasses Man. When Shinji asks for pills, they ask for information on his acquaintances that they've been beating shadows and going into Tartarus. He confides to them they indeed intend to destroy the shadows and the dark hour itself, which shocks him, and we learn that his name is actually Takaya. All of them shaken, they leave Shinji and he knows that he can't go back after what happened in the past. As a few days pass, we are back at Port Island Station with Shinjiro looking to score more pills. Takaya is still amazed that they want to get rid of the Dark Hour, since they would lose their powers that they possess. Jin then mentions if Shinjiro joins them too, he will also die. He of course doesn't care about these threats since he's a badass. Now, after some time, and depending on what social clubs you did, for me I was in a cool kendo tournament, which adds some additional character growth to both you and your kendo team friends. You're thrust into another shadow battle, but this one is strangely different since it's not a full moon, and it's outside of Tartarus. Akihiko already defeated the shadow outside the shrine and was able to save the little fella, that being Koro-chan. Then, we find out that it wasn't Akihiko who defeated the shadow, but rather Koromaru. A really impressive feat, since at this point we are just assuming he's a good friendly doggo. After this is reported to the chairman, we are later greeted by Pharos in our room warning of another ordeal coming our way. And he also knows about the new additions to the team too, but is confident that we can handle anything. On to our next full moon ordeal, Fuka identifies that this is no ordinary shadow. This time we are going to a bunker to investigate and see what is ahead of us. As we arrive at the bunker, Takaya and Jin are there to greet us and introduce themselves as Strega. They don't want Tartarus to go away, since they will as a result lose their powers. They feel that bad things will always happen, if it is from shadows or humans, so what is the point in getting rid of it? The C's team is then locked in the bunker and we have to fight our way out until we get to the boss battle, which is of the Justice and Chariot Arcanas, and this is actually a two-part battle. The first part is mainly dealing enough damage so that it separates into two entities, then using the attacks that strike both of them. I found Swift Strike was pretty good, and it it consistently hit both of them. Chariot will also try and inflict ailments, so you have to have some items just in case. Once one is down, the fight gets even easier, and all your strongest attacks can simply just be focused on one of them to end the fight. After you've dealt the final blow, Mitsu radios into Ikutsuki to come get them, and tells them about Straga's involvement, and that they know everything that they've done so far. I thought personally he would have been a bit more alarmed about this, but what comes next, I can see why he was written this way. That evening, our buddy Pharos pays us a visit, and tells us that the end of the world will happen because so many people are wishing for it, as if it was destined from the start. He says that 3 poisonous flowers will bloom, 1 in my own garden, and 2 in the garden opposite ours. I don't really know what the hell that meant at the time, but whenever we tell them that there's no garden, he says that we are surrounded by flowers, again causing some confusion, but we'll see more on this later in the story. After we wake up, Mitsuru asks us to come to the 4th floor for a meeting. Lo and behold, our best boy Kuro-chan has been outfitted with some new gear, and it also comes with an evoker to help fight with his persona. Just when you think you've seen it all at this point, right? As summer break is almost over, we run into Junpei lamenting not having done enough when he sees a waifu drawing pictures on the bench, and he is smitten by her. He tries to sneak a peek at what she's drawing and can't make sense of it, blaming it on the art. Nice, Junpei. Meanwhile, at the Iwatodai strip mall, Akihiko meets up with Shinji to tell him about the new persona user who isn't human. Shinji also doesn't appear to be that impressed by this, even though it's a freaking dog with a persona, man. Akihiko brings up Shinji's past trauma and urges him to move past it, as he's always going back to the spot where it happened. Ken overhears their conversation about what happened 2 years ago, and it triggers his own trauma, and realizes that Shinji was the one who did it. In our next meeting with the chairman, he tells us that Ken is special and has the potential to summon persona, which comes as a bit of a surprise since he's only in elementary school, but the team is also supportive of this and wanted to train him to become his best self. Now back at Port Island Station, Junpei is bummed at how fast the year's going by when he runs into his waifu again. He ultimately fails at seeing what she's drawing, but he's getting closer and closer to her each interaction, and something will happen soon. And so, just a few days later, when she finally tells him her name is Chidori, and she starts bleeding while drawing, and Junpei goes to assist her and tells him she's almost done with the picture, and he knows where to find her when it's all done. I'm sure at this point, Junpei is thinking he's going to score as well. That doesn't exactly happen though. After Junpei is left by Chidori, Akihiko and Shinji meet up again outside the ramen shop and tells him about Strega and how they have personas, and how Kanemata has joined C's, which immediately sets off Shinji. He decides to finally join up without any resistance, and all this was because of Ken. Remember what I said earlier about Junpei? Well, something happens in the most Junpei of ways, as Chidori acts emo and tells him that she draws to feel alive. Among other things, Junpei lies to her and tells her that he enjoys being an epic hero, and that it's what makes him feel alive. Chidori asks him to meet tomorrow, and you know something bad is going to happen at this point. Junpei waits outside the dorms and gets kidnapped by Strega, and while Fuka has identified the next shadow ordeal, the team decides that they simply cannot wait any longer, and they head to Polonia Mall to face what I consider to be a rather mediocre boss fight. Fuka is able to identify the shadow has possessed the power cables to the island, so it's essential that we defeat it. But first, we find out what happened to Junpei. Chidori is the one who kidnapped him and wants him to have cease all operations or else he's going to get hurt. This dude literally has the worst luck with women, I swear. Now back at the mall, Shinji was able to recall that Club Escapade was having issues with power and that the shadow should be there, and sure enough, he's right. The shadow is of the Hermit Arcana, and for this battle, it would use buffs to increase its attacks, as well as charging for a much stronger attack. What you can learn from this from prior battles is how to use any debuff skills you may have, and how to defend in order to withstand the really big attacks. There really isn't much else to this battle. Once it's done, we find out the fate of Junpei. On the roof of the dorms, Junpei questions Chidori if she was acting the whole time, and she seems to be ready to admit that. The team comes just in time, and right before Chidori can summon her persona, she gets tackled by Junpei and restrained and hospitalized. When she gets interrogated, she refuses to talk to anyone but Junpei, and over time begins to open up. She simply cannot handle the swag of Junpei after he brings her a new sketchbook, but that's where things start to get weird, as she's getting choked by her own persona. We also find out that Strega members cannot fully control their personas as the C's team can. Also, another interesting thing is Chidori does not fear death as a normal person would, and view it as simply not waking up anymore. Pretty depressing, isn't it? Outside the hospital, Akihiko catches Shinji and questions him why he even has the pills. Even though he's tired of these talks, Akihiko again reaches out to him with his own past trauma, with the death of his sister Miki dying in a fire, and why he continues to fight on for her. They both agreed they have to do whatever they think is right, and in Shinji's case, it's atoning for the sins of his past. Meanwhile, in Chidori's hospital room, she's in better spirits, and her wound seems to have been healed, and where things again get interesting as we learn what she's capable of. Junpei mentions some flowers have died, and Chidori notices and is able to revive them back to perfect health. This, to Junpei, shows her superiority over him and he feels like he's losing his path as to what he's fighting for. The dynamic continues to grow between these two and is a positive development at this point in the story. Also, as you might expect, Pharos pays us another visit and mentions that the tower is bringing up memories of his past, and he's not sure why yet, but he knows why they're always going to be friends, which, when our next ordeal comes around, we find it's in the strip mall and consists of fortune and strength arcanas. I'm just going to be upfront and say that this is one of the most tedious boss fights in this game, since so much of it relies on luck. For me, I just tried to focus on strength first and took them down with my strongest attacks, and hoped that when it was time for fortune, I rolled the correct thing on a roulette wheel. Once this fight was over, I let out the biggest sigh of relief since it took way longer than it really should have. What comes after the fight, however, is one of the most heartbreaking points in the game for me. With Ken alone at the spot of his mother's death, he meets Shinji, who killed his mother. Shinji also allows him to kill him, but warns he will only end up like him and not any better off, which makes Ken reconsider his actions before Strega comes, with the intent to kill Shinji regardless of what Ken does. In a great sacrifice, Shinji takes a bullet for Ken so that he can continue to live on and fight, while Shinji can finally rest at peace with himself. For me, this part was really heart-wrenching because as a character, I really enjoyed Shinji and what he brought to the team. With the team and Akihiko lamenting the loss of Shinji, we also see the first ultimate persona transformation, which may be unusual to newer players, since if you came from a newer title, this is done through maxing social links and not an event like what you just saw. But this is a true turning point for Akihiko's character, and he becomes emboldened to stop Strega and end the Dark Hour. Ken also undergoes an introspective period at the site of his mother's death and understands that the dead are never coming back, and he has to fight on for Shinji and his mother, and his persona also becomes an ultimate shortly after Akihiko's. This is great personal growth for each character evolving and maturing before our eyes. Pharos also knows of these deaths and laments them as well, since you are his friend, and he warns of the fall that is coming. After such losses have been taken, what happens next? Natsuki announces to the class that she's leaving and her dad is sick, so she has to take care of him, leaving Fuka without her friend, of whom she's grown so close to. She also suggests that Fuka should make any amends with her parents before it's too late, like Natsuki, and to remember, you don't get any second chances in life, so you have to make the most of them. Simply accepting the way things are won't change anything. Fuka feels as though she's always tried to fit in and make people happy, but she never really did what she wanted. She also realizes that it makes her happy to see others happy, and also that her persona allows people to stay connected even when apart. This event also triggers her ultimate persona to manifest, and her personal growth has been achieved in another heartfelt moment. Even the dynamic between Mitsuru and Yukari grows as they each provide reasons they chose to fight for each other and grow closer. On the eve of the last operation, or so we think, everyone takes a moment to appreciate all that has been achieved and that they will achieve. We also learn a little C's history, as Mitsuru said that she was the only member at first and knew about the Dark Hour as a child. She also awakened her persona when her father and research team were attacked by shadows. To this point, it is clear that every member of C's has experienced quite a bit of trauma in their lives, and through hardship, they are united. As we enter what we assume to be the final battle on the Moonlight Bridge, Takaya and Jin are waiting for us before we even get to the Shadow. Takaya tries to talk us out of completing our mission again, but ultimately gives up. The dual boss fight with Strega also isn't bad, since I used a lot of buffs to increase critical damage and relied on proper heals and strong physical attacks, and eventually they both wore down. As the fight ends, they jump off the bridge and are presumably dead at this point. But the fun isn't over yet, as now we have to fight the final shadow of the Hangman Arcana. Personally, I also hated this fight, since not only does the shadow hit hard, it summons statues with different elements and smaller shadows that do physical attacks. As we have learned so far, the best thing to do is to learn what the statues are weak to, then exploit this until all three are down, and then the shadow is dazed, and you can do all-out attacks and rinse and repeat until it's dead, and that will take care of it. As the team celebrates, they are already thinking about partying, not knowing what may lie ahead. But for now, we rest, and Pharos visits us in the daytime, and is fully aware of his lost memories, and says his goodbyes, also reminding us our friendship is forever. But will we ever see him again? The evening of the party, Takaharu brings some unfortunate bad news in that he wishes C's to disband since all the shadows are defeated. However, strange things are still happening, and the guards are now transmogrified during the Dark Hour. But wait, I thought we were done. Well, apparently not. With Akutsuki and Aigis missing, we head to Tartarus to see what's going on. In a somewhat predictable twist, Akutsuki now has betrayed us and has reprogrammed Aigis to kill us. He knew all along that the Dark Hour wouldn't disappear, so he used us to do the job of killing the shadows for him. When we killed all the shadows, we in fact reunited them all into one being. That one being, of course, is Death Incarnate, who will bring about the fall. He also confesses to being a scientist on the team that experimented on these shadows. The shadows' power caused the manifestation devastation of the Dark Hour, Mitsuru's grandfather wanted that power. We also find out that the prince is coming as a harbinger of destruction in the fall. We then find out that this douchebag edited Yukari's dad's recording to deceive her into helping. This guy used both Yukari and her dad to complete his goals. Seriously, this dude is pretty fucked up. To add to this, he then uses Aigis to capture the team and hang them on crucifixes to be human sacrifices. Takaharu also has a come-to-Jesus moment and understands what his father did was wrong, and in turn, has a standoff with Akutsuki where both are shot. Aigis realizes she's been brainwashed and shoots down the team, which only makes Akutsuki more upset. While critically injured, he's still convinced that he can see it through, but not before succumbing to his injuries and falling to his death from Tartarus. Mitsuru, on top of all this, now has to deal with the death of her father, and the main reason for her becoming a Persona user. All this is a lot to digest, and a significant amount of death that would shake even the strongest person to their core. The next day, in the command room, everyone save for Mitsuru and Aigis are in shock, and the local news had said Takaharu died of illness, which few would believe. One thing is for sure, with the Dark Hour still around, the job isn't done, so we train until the next bombshell drops. Yukari is also given the undoctored disc with footage from her father, and is finally able to make peace with herself and his death, and triggering her ultimate persona to manifest. Yet another example of a member of the SEAS team overcoming adversity of their circumstances and embracing their own meaning of life and death, making themselves stronger than ever before. Chidori and Junpei also have a moment of quarrel, as Junpei wants to keep supporting her recovery. Chidori feels that things aren't as fun as they used to be, and doesn't want him around anymore, which understandably hurts Junpei since he's put so much time into caring for her. The next day in class, we learn about the new transfer student Ryoji, who everyone seems to adore, but he sure looks familiar. As we start to plan for the class Kyoto trip, Yukari finds Mitsuru on the rooftop, and while the two haven't always got along, they find commonplace in both losing their fathers, and get a little closer before Ryoji butts in and tries to score a date with Mitsuru, obviously failing. In the interim, before going to Kyoto, you're going to do a lot of grinding, and I really can't emphasize that enough. Take any opportunity you get to grind, because these late game stages are going to hit you extremely hard if you're not prepared. Take it from me on this. Now we finally arrived in Kyoto, and Junpei and Ryoji are already hitting it off, when suspicion starts to creep in, as Ryoji gets asked where he went for his old school trip, and he can't remember. Meanwhile, Mitsuru is still lamenting her losses, when Yukari picks her up, convinces her that they have an aligned goal of stopping the Dark Hour, and fulfilling her dad's final wish, as well as avenging Mitsuru's father's death, and they'll fight until the very end. This moment also triggers the ultimate persona for Mitsuru, as she now too is emboldened to end this thing for good. On a lighter note, we get to take a walking tour with the class, and snaps are taken with Ryoji to help lighten the mood, and lead to a little happy time together, since all we've had to deal with at this point is a lot of death. Also, it seems like it wouldn't be a Persona game without some awkward hot springs moment either, right? After all the fun is over and we're back home, we see Takaya and Jin are still very much alive, and break Chidori out of the hospital and give her the evoker back. On her way out, she casually also blames Junpei for a newfound fear of dying. During the next Dark Hour, Chidori hacks into Fuka and beckons them to come to Tartarus for a fight. Outside Tartarus, Junpei tries to reason with her, but she's too far gone to be reasoned with, and you have to battle her until the very end. During the fight, she will heal herself and use Tetrakarn to repel physical attacks, and uses fire attacks like Agilao, so be prepared for that. By this point, I had a number of good personas and items to use at my disposal, so really, this fight was just light work. After her defeat, Junpei again tries to get through to her, and she tells him it's because she fears attachment the most, and not death, and that's why she lives for the moment. On cue, Jin and Takaya enter, and understand that they can't take her back, so they shoot Junpei where he stands. In a sort of dream world, Chidori tells Junpei that she's always known when she would die, and it made her realize that she wouldn't be with him anymore. She then heals Junpei, and sacrifices her own life so that Junpei can live for both of them forever. As she passes away, she tells Junpei she loves him, and in this event, causes Junpei to freak out at Takaya, since he called her death meaningless, and then his ultimate persona is born from his and Chidori's fusing. He attacks both Jin and Takaya, forcing them to retreat until we run into them later. Now what's really cool to me is after they get back to the dorms, Junpei finally gets to see what was in the sketchbook, and it was all devoted to him. That has to feel very bittersweet as he lost the love of his life, but he got to see the drawing was him, and Junpei was who she wanted all along. During the Dark Hour, Ryoji's on the Moonlight Bridge, and he finally starts to put the pieces together as to who he is and his purpose. They had met before, and Aigis tells him that he is Death Incarnate, and the shadow that she sealed away from 10 years ago. Ryoji knows he is the 13th Arcana, and he was never meant to be. Aigis was never able to defeat him, so he was sealed away, and not only that, he was sealed into Makoto's body, who was nearby when their battle happened. Yes, that's right. Death was inside you this whole time, and you never even knew it. At this point, this is an absolutely shocking revelation, isn't it? You also brought brought him his missing 12 pieces and made him whole again. With that, Vegas attacks and is swiftly beaten and left to die on the bridge when Fuka is able to pinpoint where she is and the team rescues her from Ryoji, who has no qualms about who he is as he tells Seize that he is the appraiser of the apocalypse. And when Makoto awoken to his persona, he also revived the 12 shadows, all in order to become one with him. Who wouldn't be in shock at this point, as you've had death inside you for 10 long years, and you were baited into helping him bring about the apocalypse? Just really honestly heavy stuff to deal with. Ryoji also agrees to meet with us to inform of the maternal being Nyx coming, who is the mother of the shadows, and brought death upon the world in ancient times, with her purpose to end all life as we know it. Junpei reminds us that we never lost the battle, so it will be easy, but just as time flows, Nyx can't be defeated. In order to get the true ending when given the choice, you must let him live, and you'll be able to battle Nyx, which I don't know why you would not want to take this path, as it's an awesome way to finish this game, as you'll soon see. We have until December 31st before we all lay it on the line against Nyx. Can we do this? Or we'll all be lost. On the eve of our decision, Aigis questions her purpose for living and why she's here after her defeat to Ryoji. She feels that Seize are wasting their lives in this moment, but Akihiko says that they are planning for the future, while Aigis thinks that she has none. Her reason for being is to protect humans from shadows, yet she's unable to do so in her eyes. Junpei tells her that, when others are hurting, it's their job to help them, and that is a meaningful purpose as any. Mitsuru also says that in order to live, we all need to make changes sometimes. Aigis finally understands that her change is to be a machine that has a will to live, and she has given herself this purpose, and no one else. This understanding within herself also triggers her ultimate persona to be born, and a nice completion to her growth as a character. Now, onto our decision that has weighed heavily on us to this point. While in our room, we advise Ryoji that we wish to let him live, and he shows us his true form in Thanatos, and we get another chance to reconsider. But to hell with that, let's kick Nyx's ass. He tells us that we can find Nyx at the top of Tartarus, so let's get this over with and save the world. We have until January 31st to train up and level up, and you know we did exactly that. As it leads up to the promised day, we also find out that Jin and Takaya have been leading the cult of Nyx to usher in the end of days. Really can't wait to kick their ass once and for all, guys. And so, on the 31st, we have one final group meeting together, and we all acknowledge the memories of the Dark Hour and personas will be gone. The promise is also made to meet each other after the battle is over, even if everyone were to forget, and it'll happen on graduation day on the school's roof. Now that the sentimental stuff is over, let's get to the top of Tartarus and deal with whatever gets in our way. Right before we reach the apex, we finally have to put an end to Jin and Takaya. Jin comes first, however. In the monologue before the battle, we also learn that Akutsuki created both Jin and Takaya, and while we don't get an explanation from him as to why, he tells us they both won't live much longer, and he wants to see the end of days. The fight itself for me was pretty easy since he just uses fire attacks and Maragilo over and over, and you just wear him down over time. In his dying breaths, we find out that the Kirijo group rounded up kids from the street and gave them powers so that they could investigate Tartarus. Since it was an unnatural power manifestation, the kids had to take experimental meds to control their powers. Not only that, a few kids survived, and the operation was shut down in just 6 months. Takaya saved Jin from his past, and that's why he's so loyal to him. As the shadows surround them, Seize goes in to face Takaya while Jin blows himself up in the shadows. Now, we finally face Takaya, who promises the end is near, only for him, not us. He also feels it is the will of the people that Nyx be revived and to ensure that the fall happens. Aigis notes that to live a still life until death is not a life to live. This speaks volumes to how misguided Strega had become as well. The Takaya fight consists of him buffing and using almighty attacks like Megidola, Bufudyne, and Agidyne. You can use items that reflect magic here, and always be healing to counteract these types, and use debuff spells, which no doubt help. Once he's finally defeated, he begs us to take his life, but we refuse, and want him to watch us defeat Nyx. Now, at the apex, we see Nyx descend from the sky, and they very ominously say that they are the harbinger of the fall, and Nyx and Ryoji are essentially one being. This is the final battle, and man is it an awesome one. To put it simply, all 12 of the Arcanas you fought before will be rotated each time you take down Nyx's health bar. As you can imagine, this fight is a really long one. It took everything I had to get Nyx to shift into the Death Arcana and finish it off in spectacular fashion. This really felt like one of the longer fights in Shin Megami Tensei, even though it really wasn't, and it definitely is well worth it to get the true running for going this route. After the defeat of Nyx, just when you thought that you were home free, the moon transforms into the Death Star. Now everyone is aware of the Dark Hour and the moon, and the panic ensues at this point. The cult is rejoicing, believing that they will get what they wish for, but will end up dying. Takaya is overjoyed with what is happening too, and the Seize team is refusing to give up. As Makoto faints, Igor grants us the power of the universe, and the power to take down Nyx. Going it alone, we float into the moon's center, and with the power of our friends, we build up enough strength to deal the finishing blow to death itself. Now stuck in a sort of limbo, the team wonders if you made it out alive. You tell them it's alright, and Ryoji says normal days will return once again, and he has found the answer to life's greatest question, and so will they. Through the bonds of friendship, they seek the answers they need. Now, back on the ground, Tartarus starts to disintegrate into the sky and the moon returns to normal. Makoto also returns at the entrance of the school, with C's glad to see that you made it out alive. No one remembered the events that occurred, and so the seasons changed. Back at school with Junpei, you notice Aigis and Yukari, but he seems to not recall who she is, even though they live in the same dorm. We also find out Akihiko is moving out, and so is Mitsuru. Yukari and Junpei also think it's weird, while they don't know why they're friends. Kind of a weird thing to not openly question, right? I consider this next part to be our farewell tour of the story, as we say goodbye to all the friends we made along the way, like Bibi and Kenji, for example. On our graduation day, Aigis comes to our room to tell us she remembers everything that happened, and we should go to the place where we all made our promise to meet. Before the group arrives, Aigis understands what it means to live, thinking for yourself, not running away, and most importantly, that all things come to an end. But Aigis came to realize that protecting us was the most important thing, and her life will be worth living for that reason. As the rest of your friends approach, you fade into sleep with Aigis telling you that you'll always protect us. At this point, I had a really hard time holding back tears as our journey came to an end. This moment really helps encapsulate the meaning of Persona 3 and to appreciate the life we have and the friends we make in our time on this earth. It teaches us to be true to ourselves and not to expect changes if we cannot change ourselves. Persona 3's story is a fantastic one, and this was a fitting end that hits you on so many levels emotionally. Now that we have covered the story of Persona 3, let's talk about my opinion on the themes of Persona 3, then I'll provide my opinion on the C's team, and go into a quick gameplay discussion in my closing comments. Persona 3 thematically I consider to be a nuanced game. For what I consider to be the themes of this game revolve around the celebration of life as we know it. The good and the bad parts in life should be cherished, like our friends, our families, etc., as our lives really could end at any moment, so we should do our utmost to live life to the fullest and explore every opportunity we can before it's too late and we're left with nothing but regret. Another thing to consider is that life is not tragic because it ends, but rather celebrating all that happened. Now consider this. The cycle of life, death, rebirth, and destruction in its endless cycle. The game starts in spring, and also ends in spring, thus fulfilling this very cycle. Memento Mori is also shown quite a bit in this game, and if you're not familiar with this term, it's a threat of inevitable death, which ultimately comes to pass for Makoto in the story. All of these themes are honestly well executed in the story, and I never felt once confused as the purpose of this game. Proper job by Atlus executing this. Now, allow me to share my thoughts on the C's team. The C's team, while they're not my favorite cast in Omega 10, are definitely well written, and their interactions between each other felt organic and real. You generally feel as though all of them would be friends, were it not for them all having the potential and summoning personas. Junpei and Yukari consistently had my favorite interactions, and I'd go as far as saying Koromaru is my favorite Atlus mascot. The challenges the team had to face, from facing 12 shadows, each being harder than the last, to having 2 of their team members die on them, is already so much to deal with as is. Not only that, but they came out on top of taking out a literal god of death. The bond of friendship was so strong it could not be broken. Comparing C's to the Phantom Thieves and the investigation team, they may very well be less powerful than them, but they're very cool in their own way. My last point in this too is each member had to face a form of grief or death, and they each had to overcome that and still face these trials. Yukari and Mitsuru both lost a father, Makoto and Ken both lost parents, Akihiko and Shinji were both orphans, and Junpei had to deal with losing the love of his life, and Koromaru also lost his owner to the shadows. I mean seriously, that is really a lot of trauma to have to deal with. Memento Mori indeed. Now, let's talk about some gameplay. Regarding the gameplay of this Persona 3 portable remaster, I really wish I had some nice things to say about it, but I don't. There also have been no quality of life changes added into this game to make it more enjoyable for new or veteran players. The resolutions and textures were AI upscaled and frankly do not look at all that impressive, but I guess it is an improvement from the PSP version. I like to call it Grindsona 3 as well, because there's simply no easy way to level up like there is in Persona 5 Royal or Persona 4 Golden. You simply have to keep climbing an endless tower in Tartarus, which nearly looks the same in every single floor until you get to the very top, and even then, it's just a small change, and the music is only layered differently. It is honestly boring as hell, and I couldn't wait to hit a high enough level in the endgame so I could just stop doing that. The combat itself is unchanged from the PSP version, and the basics are the same as the newer Persona games. If you strike an enemy's weakness, you'll get a 1 more, and the enemy's down, you'll get an all-out attack. In certain situations, you can also trigger a co-op attack, which will also knock the enemy down and hit a critical. I am, however, willing to let this part slide since P3 was when Atlus started changing things up more, and this is more or less untouched from the original PSP version. Using shadows, for me at least, since I did it in a blind run, was hit or miss, but it is very simple, and there are also now several fusion calculators out there that you can use to get the personas you need, should you feel like you want some extra help. If you ask me if I enjoyed my overall experience, I would say that I have in spite of the things I mentioned earlier. Persona 3 Portable was one of my expected games to play in 2023, but that being said, I'm really glad that Atlus decided to finally put this game on every current-gen platform, so everyone can enjoy it. Is this game a lazy port? I would say that it is, but is it a bad game? It certainly is not. In fact, Persona 3 is one of the better JRPGs from a story perspective that you can play since the themes are so heavily interwoven into the plot, and really with each character you feel invested in seeing them grow until the end. What I do hope for the future of Atlus ports is that they take the feedback from reviewers and fans and really give them a better experience, because both Persona 4 Golden and Persona 5 Royal are really both exponentially better remasters, and I want this from every remaster from them going forward. That will conclude my video, so if you've enjoyed, please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. SnarfSoldier17, out.